It's true that a word considered an insult in one culture can be completely ordinary in another. Even something like loser dad might sound kind of endearing, depending on how it's said. When my daughter was still very young, I lost my wife in a car accident, and I fell into a deep despair. For my daughter's sake, I pulled myself out of that despair, gave up freelancing to stabilize my income, started my own company, and have kept going ever since. A few years ago, my daughter began working as a teacher and started building a life of her own. And now, she's finally getting married. The man she's marrying is very polite and respectful, but his father is a high-ranking executive at a major bank and an elitist who looks down on people like me who run startups. I did my best to maintain a good relationship with this father-in-law so as not to cause any trouble for my daughter's marriage. But no matter how much I tried to meet him halfway, he was never satisfied. At the wedding reception, he pulled a childish stunt by writing "Loser Dad" on my name tag. After that humiliating reception, I stopped holding back for the sake of my daughter and her husband and confronted him honestly. It was time for him to take responsibility for the repeated insults he hurled at me, all because of his inflated sense of elitism and his contempt for startup entrepreneurs like myself. My name is Stephen Mitchell, and I run an IT startup. I launched the company when I was 30, right around the time the internet was becoming widely available across the country. It was a period when the demand for system engineers was surging, and my company managed to ride that wave successfully. 20 years have passed since then, and the IT industry has undergone dramatic changes. Today, nearly 80% of people in the country have cell phones, and even seniors use messaging apps and social media as everyday infrastructure. As lifestyles evolved, those changes kept triggering new advancements in IT, creating a constant cycle of transformation. Keeping up with these rapid changes was never easy, but I chose not to blindly expand my company. Instead, I adopted a selective, small team approach with only the most talented individuals to adapt to the shifting industry. Around the time I founded my company, many others were starting theirs too, but most of them have gone bankrupt or withdrawn from business over the years. My company, however, has managed to survive those rough waters and still exists today. I may sound a bit boastful, but I believe I had a knack for reading the direction of the industry and building strategies accordingly. Back in my student days, I was a total introvert, always holed up in my room playing games or working on programming, and nobody, including myself, would have guessed I'd one day become a company owner. I've always liked thinking deeply and could spend hours absorbed in complex puzzle games. I enjoyed science subjects, and even though I didn't study all that hard, my grades were consistently good. On the other hand, I was never good at sports, and I disliked noisy social settings. I kept a low profile in class and never really stood out. In the school social hierarchy, I was probably near the bottom, but I never felt frustrated about it or had any desire to climb higher. I simply didn't like school very much. All I really wanted was an environment where I could think quietly without being disturbed. I finally found that environment when I entered university. Unlike high school, in my science and engineering university, as long as I earned my credits and completed my graduation research, I could finish my degree. Some professors even gave out credits as long as your test scores were good, regardless of attendance. So I only went to class as much as necessary and spent the rest of my time learning programming on the university's high-performance computers. I didn't have a clear goal for what I wanted to do with this skill. I just found it thrilling to make a program behave exactly as I envisioned it in my head. I preferred working with computers over interacting with people, so naturally, I had very few friends, but I never felt lonely. Until high school, being around people who looked down on me was stressful. Getting away from that environment brought me a sense of relief, because I could finally immerse myself in what I loved without worrying about others. I had built enough skill by the time I graduated to be a valuable asset at any company. One of my professors was so impressed with my programming skills that several major companies offered to hire me if I would just go through the formality of an interview. but I had no desire to give up the quiet independence I enjoyed in university and return to the noisy, hierarchical environment I remembered from high school. At that time, remote work from home had not yet become widespread. Taking a job at a big company meant commuting every day. I couldn't see myself enduring life, packed into crowded trains every morning and evening, working in a tall building full of complex human relationships. So in the end, I chose not to join any company and started working as a freelance programmer. In the beginning, my income was unstable, but in this field, performance speaks for itself. As long as I could demonstrate my ability, I had no trouble getting good paying jobs. For the first few years after graduation, I worked alone. But one day, I was asked to meet face to face with a representative from a company that regularly outsourced programming work to me. It was during that meeting that the person who appeared before me as the client representative would later become my wife. Though I had always struggled with social interaction, especially with women, our conversations were strictly about work and programming, which made it easy for me to talk to her. As we continued to meet for project discussions, I gradually stopped feeling the usual pressure to say the right thing around her, and I found myself able to speak naturally. She, too, preferred thoughtful conversation over smooth-talking men, so we connected well through our work, and before long, we began spending time together, even outside of our jobs. Since my student days, I had resigned myself to the idea that I would probably go through life without ever forming a romantic relationship, and I had told my few close friends the same. That's why those friends were shocked when we got married just a year after meeting, but honestly, no one was more surprised than I was. Even after getting married, I didn't change my lifestyle as a freelance programmer. My wife left her job after we got married, but she used her experience in the IT industry to become my manager, helping me with my work. Thanks to her, I was freed from the burdens of sales, tax paperwork, and other time-consuming tasks, which allowed me to fully immerse myself in programming, and I began earning several times more than a typical corporate systems engineer. Not long after we had fully settled into our new life, we were blessed with a daughter. We named her Samantha. She grew up healthy without any major illnesses and eventually started elementary school. At that time, I truly believed that life was something that rewarded hard work. I had a sense of fulfillment I could never have imagined as a student, and I was more determined than ever to work hard and support my family. It wasn't long after that when I was struck by the most devastating moment of my life. One day, my wife was hit and killed by a car with faulty brakes while walking down the street. She was not only my wife and the one who managed everything about my work environment, but most importantly, she was Samantha's mother, and in an instant she was gone. No amount of words could ever describe the shock and despair I felt at that time. The trauma was so intense that my memory became fragmented, and even now, I still cannot piece together the funeral events in proper order. I can recall certain images and phrases from that time, but I'm unable to follow the sequence or understand the connections. That's how completely shattered I was, unable to think clearly at all. The world before me felt meaningless, and I was close to forgetting why I was even alive. If it hadn't been for Samantha, I don't think I would have made it to age 50. Samantha, still in elementary school, was so shocked by losing her kind and loving mother that she stopped eating and had to be put on an IV drip at the hospital. When I saw Samantha lying weak and pale in that hospital bed, something stirred back to life inside me. My wife wasn't coming back. I had to finally accept that. As her father, how could I remain broken and hollow? If I were the only one suffering, I could wallow in it all I wanted, but now I was the only one who could support Samantha. That sudden wave of realization surged through me, and I began to pick myself up and move forward, despite the grief. Sometimes, I wonder if my wife, watching from heaven, gave me a final push, telling me to get it together and stand strong. In any case, from that moment on, I made it my life's goal to ensure that Samantha would have a bright and fulfilling life, and I resolved to do everything necessary to make that happen. The first step was returning to work. Until then, I had always waited for my wife to bring in the projects, but from now on, I would have to handle everything myself. Fortunately, the clients I had built trust with welcomed me back and began giving me assignments just like before. But no matter how motivated I was, there were only so many hours in a day. Handling all the non-programming tasks while also taking care of Samantha on my own quickly became overwhelming. Even losing a bit of sleep wasn't enough to keep up. If it were just a matter of getting by, we could have continued like that. But with Samantha growing up and future education expenses in mind, I knew I had to rethink my approach to work. I considered hiring a manager, but I knew no one could understand me and work with the same attention to detail my wife had, so I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. After struggling with these thoughts for some time, I finally decided, at the age of 30, to start a company. I had no intention of creating a large corporation with many employees. I believed that if I could handpick a small team of people I could communicate with effortlessly and form a highly profitable group of professionals, even someone like me could make it work. So I began managing the company by trial and error, making many mistakes along the way, but steadily building a structure that suited me. I recruited a friend who had great people skills and excelled at sales, and I also hired and trained younger talent who could support my programming. Gradually, I expanded the company. 3 years after launching the business, we had grown to a team of 7, including myself, and had become recognized in the industry as a team of highly skilled professionals. By that time, Samantha had also recovered from her mother's death and was back to being her cheerful self, attending school with energy. By the time she entered junior high school, my company was able to collaborate with large corporations. Now, 20 years since I've founded the company, it has grown into a comprehensive IT services firm that provides not only software development, but also hardware for network infrastructure as a packaged solution. We have 60 employees, not many for a company of our standing, but we remain firmly committed to a small, elite team, and our members are incredibly talented and diverse. A few years ago, we started working with major companies on financial systems, and some of the advisors we brought in from securities firms and investment funds are now managing our corporate assets. Thinking back to how I once refused to join any company because I didn't want to deal with too many people, it's almost hard to believe the position I'm in now. Life truly is unpredictable. And all of this began because, after my wife passed away, I wanted to ensure I had the financial means to raise Samantha without compromise. As for Samantha, she found her calling during her student years and entered the Faculty of Education to become a teacher. She now works as an elementary school teacher, dedicating herself to her students. To the public, I am seen as a successful entrepreneur who built a highly profitable startup. But more than anything, I achieved as a business owner. What I am most proud of is that I was able to fully support my daughter Samantha as her father until she realized her dream of becoming a teacher. Lately, my greatest concern had been Samantha's marriage. Shortly before graduating from university, Samantha had set her heart on a young man she wanted to marry in the future. His name was Tyler, a cheerful young man 4 years older than Samantha. Upon graduating, Samantha brought Tyler home and formally introduced him to me. Tyler had been raised in a well-off household as his father was an executive at a major bank, and he carried a refined air about him that was immediately noticeable. Despite being raised under the guidance of such an elite father, Tyler showed no arrogance at all and treated me, Samantha's father, with the utmost respect. Just one look at the way they cared for each other, and I felt certain that Samantha would be happy with this young man. Since losing my wife, I had thrown myself into building a company to raise Samantha without compromise. Now that she had found a stable job doing what she loved, and a dependable partner to share her life with, I felt that my own life had finally come full circle. That was the feeling I had. So from the time I met Tyler, I simply wished for the day to come when Samantha could be married in peace, free from any trouble. Some might think it's an overreaction for a father to be so cautious before his daughter's wedding, but the truth is, I had one lingering concern. That concern was Tyler's father, Thomas. As a matter of fact, I had previously done business with the bank where Thomas served as an executive, and I was already somewhat familiar with who he was, even before Samantha introduced Tyler. My company had been planning to expand operations, and we had been negotiating financing with several major banks, including Thomas's. This expansion plan had been carefully developed over several years, and we were fully prepared. So rather than negotiate from scratch, I approached the banks with a firm proposal. Here is our business plan, and if you agree with it, this is the amount we'd like to borrow. I thought this approach would save time for both parties, rather than wasting it haggling back and forth. However, Thomas apparently saw my direct approach as presumptuous. I don't care how well they're performing. Some upstart startup thinks it can throw terms at us and dictate the loan? That's the height of arrogance. That's what I heard Thomas had said in anger. Unless they show a willingness to significantly back down from these terms, don't bother dealing with them. It seemed my decision to present firm terms up front had offended Thomas's deep sense of elitism and his respect for hierarchy and formality. If I've angered a key decision maker, we might not be able to secure funding from that bank anymore, I thought, and I decided not to push further. I prioritized not worsening the relationship. So while I was still cautiously continuing negotiations, Samantha suddenly introduced Tyler, who is Thomas's son, as her fiancé. I was stunned by the coincidence. However, it had never even occurred to me to link business negotiations with Samantha's choice of a lifelong partner. Even if Thomas had taken a hard stance in our dealings, I never let that influence how I treated Tyler. As Samantha's father, I made a sincere effort to get to know Tyler and saw that he was earnest, principled, and genuinely cared for her. So it never once crossed my mind to oppose their marriage, and I intended to treat Thomas with the utmost respect as Samantha's future father-in-law. Naturally, Thomas must have realized I was the entrepreneur who had requested financing from his bank. But I believed that even if he felt resentment toward me as a businessman, he would act calmly and respectfully for his son's sake. Unfortunately, that hope was betrayed. During several wedding preparations, when we crossed paths, Thomas repeatedly took a condescending attitude toward me. So you're Samantha's father? The man who tried to squeeze absurdly generous loan conditions out of our bank is now to become Tyler's father-in-law? I find that rather hard to digest. That's how Thomas opened the conversation at the very first formal family meeting, freezing the room with tension. Tyler, having apparently heard about me from his father beforehand, immediately cut in, "Dad, you promised you wouldn't bring that up today." Thanks to him, things didn't escalate further, but every time Thomas gave me that cold, scrutinizing look, I couldn't help but feel shaken. Later, at the engagement meeting, Thomas found a moment to speak with me alone. I had always hoped Tyler would marry someone from a more respectable background, he began abruptly. I see. When he first told me he wanted to marry Samantha, I tried to get him to reconsider, but he's as stubborn as I am. No matter what I said, he refused to treat his choice of a spouse like some part to be swapped out. So I gave in and let him go through with it. After meeting Samantha, I found her to be a fine young woman. I won't oppose the marriage any further. I truly appreciate your understanding. But just because I've accepted her doesn't mean I've accepted her father. I understand. So, you've started an IT company and somehow managed to keep it afloat. But your background is rather irregular, isn't it? When I first saw your alma mater, I didn't even recognize the name. Turns out it's ranked far below the top-tier universities I graduated from, barely a mid-tier university. It's true that the university isn't widely known and offers fewer departments than elite institutions in the city, but it has excellent faculty in the sciences and has produced many skilled engineers. One of its researchers even gained international recognition recently. Oh, so are you trying to tell me you're one of those brilliant graduates I should be impressed by? No, that's not what I meant at all. I was only trying to explain how the university is viewed in the academic community. I see. So what you're implying is that I, a bank executive, wasn't even capable of researching that information on my own? I thought I had the ability to hold a position like mine, but I suppose to a hotshot startup founder like you, I must seem like nothing more than an incompetent old man. How humbling. Please, wait. I don't see you that way at all. We are about to become family through our children, and I sincerely hope to maintain a peaceful and respectful relationship. If there's anything I've done that caused offense, I will correct it. But please, for the sake of our children, let's not escalate things unnecessarily. Humph. If you were capable of such humble behavior, you should have shown it from the beginning. Had you approached our bank for financing with that level of courtesy, I would have been much more willing to face you pleasantly. But I'm already convinced you harbor a deep-rooted arrogance that can't be hidden. Just because you're bowing your head in panic now that I'm confronting you doesn't mean I'll be easily fooled. The only reason I'm accepting Samantha as part of our family is because Tyler insists on marrying her. But her relatives? That's another story. Especially someone like you, with such a questionable background and a suspicious route to entrepreneurship. I cannot allow a man like that to act as one of my family. From those words, I realized Thomas had thoroughly investigated my background. He seemed to view my path, working as a freelancer after university and suddenly founding a company at 30, as suspicious and irregular. These days, it's not unusual for students to launch startups even while still in school. But to someone like Thomas, a man of my generation, not entering a company and becoming a president at such a young age seemed unnatural, untrustworthy even. Had this been a business setting, I could have insisted that my achievements should speak for themselves, not my past. But this wasn't business. Thomas was examining me as the father of his son's bride, and I couldn't afford to push back the way I would in negotiations. It's true that I didn't join a company after university and instead worked independently, eventually starting my own business. I understand that this may not align with your values, but I've never been involved in anything illegal or shady. Still, I realize I cannot fully erase your doubts today. So, after Tyler and Samantha are married, I will avoid participating in family gatherings and keep our connection as in-laws as discreet as possible. I hope you can accept that as a compromise. I assumed Thomas feared someone of questionable background like me might linger too close and try to exploit his status as a bank executive. So I hope that if I vowed not to act as a relative, it might ease his suspicions somewhat. Um, well, it's not like you said anything I hadn't already assumed. But if you're making that promise yourself, then it carries some weight. So, you won't be attending the wedding reception, correct? What? You just said you would avoid participating in family gatherings. The wedding reception is the most public one of them all. It's only logical to cancel your attendance there first. Surely you wouldn't go back on your freshly spoken vow? I only said I wouldn't behave like a relative after they're married. Not attending my daughter's wedding reception is unthinkable. Humph. So that's your true nature. You offer a gesture of compromise, but when pressed, you immediately backtrack to protect your own interests. Just what I'd expect from someone who graduated from a mid-tier university and skipped entering the workforce before starting a company. That aggressive loan negotiation of yours was just another bluff, wasn't it? At that moment, I finally understood that Thomas held a deep-seated animosity toward me, and that no matter how much I yielded, he would never accept me as part of his family. If you insist on attending the reception, go ahead. But stay out of the spotlight. If you make a scene, I'll remove you by force if necessary. If you want to watch your daughter's big day to the end, stay in the shadows and behave yourself. With that, Thomas turned and walked away. I stood there in shock, unable to process the depth of hostility I had just encountered. There's no salvaging my personal relationship with Thomas, but at least he seems to like Samantha. If staying quiet at the reception is all it takes to ensure her wedding goes smoothly, then I'll accept that. Focusing only on Samantha, I resolved to avoid drawing any attention and do nothing to provoke Thomas's anger during the reception. At that point, I had accepted every demand he had thrown at me, and I clung to the faint hope that he wouldn't push it any further. That's why I had no idea Thomas was already planning a public humiliation for me at the wedding. The day of the reception arrived. I visited Samantha in her dressing room and saw her in her wedding gown. She reminded me so much of her mother in her youth that I had to fight back tears. Watching her surrounded by friends, smiling and receiving their blessings, I was filled with satisfaction. I stepped outside the venue, looked up at the sky, and told my wife in heaven, I fulfilled my role. As the opening time approached, I greeted guests at the entrance and entered last, after confirming that everyone had gone in. Though Thomas had warned me to stay discreet, I had already planned to be as invisible as possible, even without that. The stars of the day were, of course, the bride and groom. I would be content just watching them from afar. But as I approached the family seating area, I couldn't believe my eyes. Each seat had a name tag, printed in advance to avoid confusion. Mine should have read Stephen Mitchell. However, what I saw there was not my name, but the words "Loser Dad." If it had simply been a typo or the wrong name altogether, I wouldn't have cared. However, it was clear that this childish insult, "Loser Dad," couldn't have appeared by accident, and it had undoubtedly been planted deliberately by someone with malicious intent. Those around me, waiting for me to sit down, saw the shift in my expression and quickly noticed the name tag, causing a stir. One of the staff, alerted by the commotion, came over and noticed the tag. I heard a muffled gasp. How could this happen? Upon closer inspection, it was clear this wasn't some handwritten prank. It was printed exactly like the others. The staff member who gasped had probably realized right away that this was part of the official print batch, not a last-minute joke. So someone tampered with the data before printing, and only a few people could have done that. As I muttered this to myself, I heard a voice. Well, well, what a surprise. You know, back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for digital text to get scrambled. I guess things like that still happen, huh? The voice belonged to Thomas. The moment I saw the name tag, I had already suspected him. The venue staff could have altered the data for sure, but who else would have a motive to humiliate me like this? And now, standing in front of me with a smug grin, Thomas was toying with the tag like it was nothing. As the groom's father, he could have easily told the staff that there was a mistake in the guest list and provided a correction to replace my name. Everyone else was pale with shock, but Thomas alone wore a pleased expression, confirming my suspicions beyond any doubt. Dad? Suddenly, I heard my daughter's voice. Samantha and Tyler had left the stage, drawn by the commotion. They both stared, speechless, at the tag in Thomas's hand. Who would do something like this? This is awful. Who had access to the name list? Find out and hold them responsible. Even though we were in the middle of the wedding reception, Samantha's eyes were welling with tears, and Tyler was visibly agitated. I quickly approached them and said, "This is nothing. If you two cause a scene now, it could ruin the entire day. But this is just unacceptable. That's right, there's no way we can just ignore such an insult to Samantha's father." As they were struggling to calm down, Thomas spoke to them with a smile. Well, whether this counts as an insult is open to interpretation. What? Dad, what are you talking about? If this isn't an insult, what is it? There are words that are offensive in one culture, but commonplace in another. Loser dad could be seen as a term of endearment, depending on how you hear it. After all, this Stephen here is a man who graduated from a mid-tier university, wandered around without a job, and somehow started a company through suspicious means to those of us who rose through proper channels, educated with dignity and honor. He might seem like a loser dad who clawed his way up from the back alleys. So perhaps this name tag was a touch of humor and an amusing little act by someone with a sense for satire. That's nonsense. I agree. I don't accept that kind of twisted sense of humor. Humor is subjective. Whether you accept it or not is beside the point, and it remains a possibility. Either way, there's no need to take such a light-hearted gesture so seriously. Let's continue with the ceremony as planned. With that, Thomas gently placed the loser dad name tag back in front of my seat and said, "Go ahead, Stephen," flashing a cold smile. I immediately understood that if I resisted now, Thomas would brand me a petty man who couldn't even take a joke and insult me further. If an argument broke out here, it would ruin the reception beyond repair. So I clenched my teeth and sat down at the seat where Thomas had placed the tech. He grinned with satisfaction and said, "Stephen truly is a big man." With this, people may stop calling him a flash-in-the-pan startup president and return to his seat. Samantha and Tyler looked furious and were about to protest, but I told them, "Please, for my sake, let it go for now. Don't ruin this day." They both seemed to realize in that moment that Thomas had indeed tampered with the name tag data. Thomas's goal had likely been to publicly humiliate me and showcase my submission to prove to everyone that I was beneath him and powerless to resist. Through this, Thomas likely intended to make it clear to everyone that I was in a position where I couldn't oppose him no matter what, like a subordinate, and to establish himself as being in absolute control. Throughout the rest of the reception, he was in high spirits, flaunting his authority as he mingled with guests. And so, I endured the entire reception with "Loser Dad" placed in front of me. Despite the humiliation, I found solace in the fact that I hadn't ruined Samantha's special day. I imagined my wife in heaven smiling wryly and offering me some comfort for what I had endured. The moment the reception ended and the guests began to leave, so did the end of my patience. Thomas, having greeted most of the guests, was now lounging on a sofa in the hall, arms spread wide, basking in the afterglow. When he saw me approach, he simply said, "Oh," and crossed his legs arrogantly. Any decent person, upon seeing the bride's father approach, would stand and exchange kind words. But Thomas stayed seated, emphasizing the gap in status as if a master addressing a servant. Clearly, he believed he had utterly subdued me today and intended to treat me this way from now on. That was a good reception. I appreciate that you understood the humor behind the name tag and kept quiet. If you continue to remember your place, we can have a smooth family relationship moving forward. Until the end of the reception, I had smiled no matter what he said, just to keep the peace. But now that my duty of presenting Samantha's marriage to the world was complete, I had fully switched modes. A smooth relationship with you going forward? You must be joking. I have no intention of being related to a man who went so far as to stamp an insult on my name tag. What? Are you drunk? Do you realize what you're saying? I'm fully aware, Thomas, respected executive of a major bank. I've treated you as my daughter's father-in-law and made every possible concession. Yet you've continued to belittle and humiliate me. I've had enough. From this point forward, I refuse any form of association with you. I see. So this is a declaration of severance? Not just as family, but professionally too? You clearly have no idea how much influence I have in the banking world. If I so much as make a call, no bank will ever loan to your company again. Is that so? Well then, you may want to know that I've already given instructions to withdraw all funds we manage from your bank. Ha ha. Are you trying to make me laugh? Even if your little company pulled its money, the impact would be negligible. Just then, Thomas's phone rang. Still chuckling, he answered, but after a few moments, his smile vanished. He began muttering, "What do you mean?" And, "That can't be." After ending the call, he looked at me as if seeing something unimaginable. Emergency call from the bank, I assume? They must have told you that several $50 billion is about to be pulled, and that you're urgently needed back for a countermeasure meeting, right? How did you know that? Don't tell me you're connected to the fund behind that withdrawal. I'm very much involved because I'm the one who created that fund. Years ago, I, the man who built a company through methods you never understood and always looked down on as suspicious, began working in financial systems as well. Once I developed a solid understanding of finance, I hired professionals and launched an investment fund division. It turned out to be far more profitable than expected, so I spun it off as a separate company. That fund has since grown into one of the world's leading investment firms, and it has been channeling a substantial amount of capital into your bank. I believe the total had reached around $50 billion. That's impossible. If you had access to that kind of money, why did you ask us for a loan? Because if I used that money directly, my employees would lose their edge. If all I cared about was making money, I'd have retired long ago. But I continue working to honor the memory of my wife and the years we built this company together, and to keep a record of the work I did to raise my daughter. And yes, helping my hardworking employees grow their skills and contribute to society is a key goal. Back to the point, I will no longer associate with you as family or in business. Not a single cent of my fund's capital will remain with your bank. Please return to your office and deal with the fallout as you see fit. But no matter what measures you take, my decision is final. Wait, there's no need to jump to conclusions. We're family now. We should support each other. Oh, so now you need the help of the loser dad? If you wish to call yourself an elite, then act like one and carry your pride through to the end. With that, I turned my back on Thomas and walked toward the exit. When he reached out, trying to cling to me from behind, I gently brushed him off. He collapsed to the floor, limp and defeated, and didn't follow me any further. News of my fund's massive withdrawal began spreading among investors that very night. Other funds and individual investors, reacting to the movement of such a large sum of money, began pulling their assets as well. The stock price of Thomas's bank plummeted. The bank convened an emergency meeting and requested that I return the funds, but I refused to entertain the request. Eventually, word reached the bank about what Thomas had done to me at the wedding reception. Once it was confirmed that his actions had triggered this crisis, the board of directors and shareholders were furious. Under intense criticism, Thomas was stripped of all his titles, denied his severance pay, and fired. The story spread throughout the financial industry. No firm would dare make the foolish move of hiring someone who had enraged a major investment fund. Thomas's return to the public stage was now all but impossible. Meanwhile, Tyler and Samantha were happily living their lives together, often inviting me over for meals. I'll never forgive my father for what he did to you at the wedding. He's unemployed now and stays at home, but I have no intention of reaching out. Unless he sincerely bows his head to you and apologizes, I won't see him again, and I won't let him see Samantha either. Tyler expressed his anger and apologized to me time and again for his father's actions. Just as he said, if someday Thomas were to come to me of his own accord, with genuine remorse and an apology, I might consider having at least a minimal relationship with him as family. Everything depends on what Thomas chooses to do. My fund has since moved its capital to another bank and resumed operations, continuing to generate significant profits. But I have no intention of living a life of ease with those profits. As long as my body allows, I'll continue working in my original field, programming, and applying my skills to contribute to society. I've entrusted the role of protecting my daughter to her husband, Tyler. From now on, I will quietly watch over them from a distance, offering support only when truly needed. And somehow, I feel my wife in heaven is watching over me, approving of the path I've chosen.